No fiddle today. I just wanted to talk about um, fiddle quality. And I was thinking that what if there is really no such thing as a bad violinist, but rather there's only good violins, bad violins. And what makes a good violinist? Well, um, that's very subjective, of course. But I think what's more interesting is to ask what makes a good violin, because I think a good violin you can just sort of strap on a a jockey to that horse, and if the horse is good enough, um, hey, the jockey brings a weight class or some know-how, some ability, some horse sense, but it's really the horse that's gonna outpace the other horses. So I think violin is a little like that. I've been playing with all these setups recently, and it's been pretty educational. So I was talking to a luthier about a year and a half ago, and he was at the end of his career, and he was, I asked a pointing question. I was saying, hey, like, what is the deal? Like, if you had to sort of weight what's important as a maker, because I was trying to bring the conversation, what makes a good violinist, and I wanted to tease out of the maker what makes a great violin. And after a lifetime of building instruments, he had like three aspects that are extremely important, and they are important in this order. So first and foremost is the quality of the front plate of the wood, so the face of the violin, and that dictates a lot. So it's not to say that um, there's like one quality about the face of a violin that will make it great. Um, they've measured great instruments and the swings of variabilities on the plate. Just range. It just takes the whole range. So thicknesses in different areas. Uh, there was some theory. I think it was on this one Del Jesu that had must have really thin, like a really thin proportion at the thinnest point. Like it must be really thin, and they measured it, and it was extremely thick. And they were like, "What?" So they there's there's a variation of usually like the cuts are the same, F hole shapes and things like that. Let's take that for granted for now. But as long as the front plate is really good quality, then that is the most important thing for building an instrument. So, of course, that's an art and a science on how you choose your wood, how you treat your wood, how you end up grading your wood so it's got a certain gradient, certain arching, all that stuff. That's all those variables are important, of course. But the quality of that top piece is the number one thing that makes violin great. Um, the second thing was the varnish. So I know my violin maker, Jan Spiedlin in Czech Republic. He's a big varnish guy. His dad was a big varnish guy. So I know there's like schools of thought in violin making where they get really fixated on varnishes. Other schools of thought get fixated on probably dimensions and things. I don't know. But yeah, there's definitely makers that get really sucked into the varnish world, and whether they're trying to recreate Strad varnishes, which are really interesting. They put Strad varnishes under a spectrometer and looked at all the different metals and compounds in the varnish up close, and they were like, "Whoa, what's this? Like, how did this like arsenic get into the mix?" Or I don't know if the arsenic was in there, but it's get the idea of like these really confounding properties that were in some of the varnishes of Strad's time. And I don't think there was a huge variation in the varnishes between instruments with like golden age Strads. So yeah, once you sort of arrive at a varnish that works, it's the second most important aspect of a violin, according to this luthier, and I've definitely heard that before too. And then the third, so in third place, meaning the third oven, the bronze medal of importance is the setup. And this is where I believe a violinist like myself can actually play with this set of variables. It's pretty cool. So what is the setup? Well, I mean, it can range from anything from strings and pegs to your bridge, which is probably not something a violinist will end up building, or a sound post, but those things, like those really fundamental things that come on the instrument afterwards. So sound post, bridge, the arching of the fingerboards actually kind of important too. Let's put that in there in the setup world. So that's pretty fundamental to the instrument, of course. Like the luthier will be building the instrument with the fingerboard. So it's not something the violinist can control, but that arching needs to be like pretty specific to the bridge height, and then there's all these dimensions so that goes. There's a lot of that are sort of crossover into the violin making of it, but the setup is sort of a big range of things, and then the setup components that I think a violinist could probably tackle without needing to be a maker is things like sound post adjustments, choosing your strings, adjusting where your bridge is. There's some optimal measurements for where the bridge sits from the top of the instrument, and tail gut materials for the tailpiece. So things like that, and even things like chin rests, like the thing that not the shoulder rest, but the chin rest. That's important too, because where it clamps on the instrument changes sort of where your instrument's vibrating. So if you were to like throw that into the mix, you could say chin rest too. So that all is the big setup part. And so what do you get after all these components come together? Well, you have an instrument that passes or fails. And I've played on some instruments where I didn't have to do much. I just felt like I was in an autopilot. And that's what's interesting. That's what I really wanted to talk about, because as I've been playing with my instrument, I haven't achieved sort of a level where the instrument is akin to the best instruments I've ever played. But realizing that small adjustments to your setup can lead to a greater instrument more and more. And the feeling of just being on autopilot becomes stronger and stronger. So the most important part of playing on a really good instrument is being comfortable, of course, and that's really important to marry the player and the fiddle. But if the fiddle is really good, I submit that you don't even have to be that good of a violinist to have the fiddle do all the work. I've been to a couple concerts. There were some no-name soloists that were on the program. No-name, I've never heard of them, so maybe they're not in the top 50 touring musicians. They were sort of like a local outstanding musician who I was just in town. I remember one in Seattle I was in town for, and I think she was an upcoming violinist. Anyway, she had a very nice instrument, and I could tell the instrument was better than the fiddle player. And all the same, the performance was fine. It was a strong performance. It was very enjoyable, but I could tell the violin was leading the player. Isn't that amazing? And I wanted to make this video because I was watching some YouTube videos last night. I was shopping for a Beethoven cadenza that I might want to use, and I really like this one cadenza, and I was like kind of going back and forth, like, let me hear the Chrysler one again. I bumped into this soloist. Don't know his name. It's not really important, but going through the listening experience of it, just happened to bump into like Sharing and Milstein and Kogan and Perlman even, and I listened to their cadenzas, and there was a certain benchmark with those interpretations and performances. They just had a certain assertiveness. Assertiveness meaning like there was no the violinists were never in a sort of panic during the cadenzas, and if there's a place to be panicked, and it would be a cadenza because it's so technical. So there was a certain ease about them. Maybe that's the best way of saying it. And then I went over to this video of some fellow that was playing. It was based on his like demeanor and the quality of the orchestra and things like that. I had the feeling that he was actually quite an excellent violinist. However, I could tell either his fiddle wasn't set up correctly or he was just playing on a fiddle that wasn't up for his ability. And you could just tell like there was a certain symmetry where the violin was giving 50%, he was giving 50%, and it was a bit of a tug of war, like between, at every moment there was a moment of stress where he's like, "Is this fiddle going to do it? Okay, the fiddle did it. Is this fiddle going to punch this arpeggio out really quickly and brilliantly? Does the fiddle is the fiddle going to like sound when I hit this really high harmonic?" And it was a crapshoot. Like I would say 50% of the time, you could tell like from the stress that things were not ideal. And probably he was used to that at this point. Like you could tell like that was his setup, that was his world, but there was no ease. It was a very, very antagonistic relationship with the violinist and the violin. So I was thinking, you take Schering's violin and you just give it to this soloist in that moment, and what would have happened? And I submit, like, this player was a damn fine good player, and he would have sounded like Schering, with Schering's violin. He would have risen to the occasion and then some. He probably would have nailed it out of the park. And it just got me thinking, like these fiddles, we might be at the mercy of these fiddles more than we like to let on. It might make violinists a little bit of a head case, because if you're trying super super hard, you can only get a certain amount out of your fiddle. Well, that can make you go crazy in a way. And it got me thinking about Tom Wolfe's book, The Right Stuff. I read this book so long ago, probably when I was 18 or something like that. But it's one of those books where it's just like every page left an impression. So you just remember like Chuck Yeager, and you remember all these moments with the X1 and all these planes. And there's this sprawl of text in there that's talks about how the first I don't know, like the Mercury, before the Apollo program, I guess there was oh no, maybe the Saturn program. But anyway, the program that was before Apollo program, where they were basically trying to cast pilots for the space missions. So 60, no, maybe 50s, 1950s, and they realized they didn't really need any engineers or actual like fighter pilots for this task, because all they needed to do was just have a dummy in this vessel, and the dummy was just get strapped in, not unlike the dog that went up in the Russian craft, or I guess maybe there's some monkeys that went up in space first too. But it's something that the program was at such where all the engineering was done on the ground. They put an astronaut in there, or a cosmonaut in there for show. These people didn't do anything in the early program, in the space program, and there was some pushback from these great pilots that were very influential. So I don't think Chuck Yeager necessarily went into any of these early space programs, but he was very influential in pushing that these great fighter pilots were actually like more than just test dummies, where they just sit there with the seatbelt on and then come back and report on the stresses. They wanted to like do this, so they actually invented small functions that the pilot could do, so they felt like they're in a part, like actually steering the plane. And it was funny because I was watching this cadenza in Beethoven, and you'd think there'd be no connection between Chuck Yeager and watching some Beethoven cadenzas, but I was really getting a sense that the violin is a lot like a racehorse, where or an early spaceship, where we're just strapped in. We're actually not doing much. We bring our bodies, and that is it. And at a certain level, rather. I mean, you can't be a complete off the couch violinist and do anything, but for the most part, it's you bring this great piece of engineering to literally anyone, and they can probably nail it out of the park. So I guess my big thesis here is, um, try to get your hands on the finest fiddle you can. There are modern instruments that sound great, of course. Probably spend a lot of time trying to get it right. So that level of anxiety is zero. And that's what I'm trying to do right now. Just I'm trying to really optimize my violin so it's like the perfect piece of engineering. And then I can just be very passive and sit like an early cosmonaut and just kind of let the ride happen to me, rather than having to do so much like spinning plates on my fingers and just to get things working. So that's the goal. And yeah, I just wanted to share some of that background, some of that feedback from the luthier, and yeah, a little bit of thought on the violin and the violinist.